The fork scraped the plate, and my stomach flinched because, for the first time all day, the quiet in my head wasn't quiet at all. There was a thread of sound running through it that wasn't music from the dining room, wasn't silverware or champagne laughter. It was the sea, not the romantic sea from the brochure, the groan and hum of a big engine pushing a hotel through cold water, but something with breath behind it, like lungs drawing in air that didn't belong to them. I took a breath of my own, felt the cool, clean, air-conditioned relief slide down my throat, and pretended I wasn't hearing anything except the murmurs and the clink of glasses and the waiter saying, "Sir, will you be having the chocolate dome tonight?" I said yes, even though I knew it would make me feel like I'd swallowed a bowling ball. I said yes because saying no implied I needed to make decisions, and all my decisions for the day had been soft ones. Street cats, cheap magnets, a photo of an old city gate lit gold. I had settled into vacation brain, and I didn't want to climb back out. The dining room looked like money had been poured into plastic and told to behave like marble. Blue glass, white paneling, light bouncing off appointments designed to be a little nautical without committing. The ceiling rose up 3 floors, and if I could have seen the sky, it would have been a postcard. But they put me in the back, no windows, and that was fine with me. I was already full of a day, and I wanted dessert in the quiet. Then I saw the couple by the window, and something inside me pressed a thumb to the bruise I didn't know I had. They were maybe mid-40s, matching linen, cruise professional. They had that look of people who would ask the guide 3 polite questions with their whole faces. You see hundreds like them on a ship like this, and you never think you'll remember any of them. But I'll never forget the way their mouths tried to keep shape while their eyes overflowed. It wasn't one of them comforting the other, no rocking or head on shoulder. Just 60 seconds of tears running unbothered, as if their bodies had decided independently to do this, and their faces were trying to follow along. They both stood, chairs pushed in with perfect manners, and left without paying the bill. When they passed me, the woman's chest hitched once like a swallowed cough, and the man's hand was clenched around a napkin hard enough that his knuckles looked polished. I didn't go after them. Why would I? Couples fight on cruises. People hear bad news. Someone always gets food poisoning. 3 tables over, a kid had just discovered he could stack butter patties into a little tower, and the table applauded like he'd landed a plane. There was a rattle of laughter somewhere near the bar, the kind that turns into a bark. The chocolate dome arrived with a little ice cream, and I broke the shell just to watch the sauce flood the plate. The noise outside the dining room got louder, a sharp word, a heavier footfall, but I told myself it was just the late passengers, the ones we were holding for. I ate my dessert like a person who believed in desserts. I didn't think about the couple again until I realized I was walking straighter than usual to the library lounge, spine tall like I was trying to carry something without letting it show. I wanted the hush of books, the leather that had never been inside a cow. The ship did that thing where it shivered like a sleeping dog, and I could feel the engine in the soles of my shoes. Outside, someone shouted, and the shout fell the way a plate falls in a kitchen, and then the murmur restarted like nothing had happened. The carpet curb sound swallowed it. It was designed for that. I walked into the library, and it smelled like upholstery and dust and a hint of citrus. They keep it cold on cruise ships so the carpet doesn't fester. I remember thinking that. I remember touching the spine of a book like I could read by Braille what mood it would put me in. I ended up with a crime novel from the 30s because I am predictable. It had that brittle paper smell and sentences that had never heard of therapy. I sat in a chair with arms wide enough to float on, and I try to let my brain do that thing where it rolls over and shows its soft belly to the story. The bruised thumb feeling did not go away. It turned and looked at me. It was like being watched from pocket. By the time I pretended to read a page and realized I'd only seen the words the way you see road signs you've driven past your whole life. The 2 crew members had slipped behind shelf. They were whispering with their whole bodies. I moved the way you move when you're trying to look casual in a store and not get asked if you need help. One of them had a clipboard and a tie clip shaped like an anchor because branding goes all the way down on these ships. They were brought to the cooling room on deck 3, the first one said. The cooling room, the second one said, and you could hear the capital letters and the map of the ship he kept in his head. Christ, it was a mess, the first one said, which is the kind of sentence you say when you've run out of adjectives or the adjectives won't fit through your throat. I'm glad we weren't there. They stepped out like they just remembered they had to move somewhere else. Their shoes met a strip of tile and made a sound that reminds you there are parts of ships you don't see. Narrow bleached corridors, rooms full of food that won't exist in a day, doors that lock on their own to keep a fire from chewing a hole straight through. I try to read again. I turn a page. The paper cut me. It bled just enough to feel ridiculous. I laughed one short laugh that sounded like a cough without the cough. Then I stood up because sitting wasn't going to work anymore, and my body had made a decision without me. The stairwell door swallowed me, and I started to climb. Deck 6, 7, 8. You can always tell when you're getting closer to the top of a ship because the air gets colder and tighter, like it's bracing itself for open doors. I was between 2 decks when the young woman came through the door leading to the top deck, except came through isn't the right phrase. She did not take the door in as a concept. She pressed her whole body to it and made momentum stand in for intention. The heavy glass swung open because she insisted. Not with force, she wasn't running, just with inevitability. She kept moving forward, and part of me thought she was drunk, but her footsteps were too measured and too quiet. Her face was wet, not crying into your hands so no one sees wet, not tearful after an argument, not even that pretty movie crying where there's one perfect streak and a score swelling behind it. This was flooding. This was tear ducts turned into ducks. It was like her face had sprung a leak. She didn't sweep her cheeks. She didn't sniff. She walked past me like I had always been part of the wall. She looked forward at nothing like it was a job. She started down, her hand missing the rail, her left shoe dragging just enough to scuff. I watched her go, and I told myself I'd call someone when I got outside, because getting outside had resolved into a goal more real than anything else. Then, maybe 10 steps below, she stopped and my head filled with the sound of the engine for a second, the way it does when you stand under a vent. The smile she turned on me wasn't awful right away. You can hold a smile in your mind without labeling it awful, not until it asks something from you. This one was soft. That's the worst part to remember. It was soft and rounded at the edges and offered sympathy the way a mother bird offers a worm. Her eyebrows tipped up a little, and she tilted her head as if to say, I know, and I'm here. And then she bent, and then she brought her skull down on the sharp edge of the step the way you bring a hammer down when you want a nail to realize you mean it. I heard the noise more than I saw the break. It was a noise that made the stairwell a bell and my chest the clapper. Blood came out along lines the ship had designed for cleaning. It ran in thin rivers that knew the way to the drain. I opened my mouth to say, hey, and what came out was something else. My book fell, and the sound it made when it hit the floor was stupid and cheerful. I ran because my body took back control, and because there are times when you don't even deserve the word coward, because it implies you were part of the decision. The outside doors bar pushed down under my hand. The air punched me and tasted like anodized metal. It smelled like salt and electricity and old sunscreen. I took 2 steps out and saw 5 people standing in a row that wasn't a row and 10 more on the deck in positions that weren't sleeping. The 5 standing smiled with those same 2 kind eyes while their faces washed. One of them had a narrow rod in his hand. You know, the kind of steel that's meant to hold up a rope barrier? And it was bent in the wrong place, like he'd been trying to pull it out of a concrete socket and couldn't decide which way to go. He raised it, and my brain, God help it, tried to calculate what he meant to do with it. The answer arrived, and I didn't wait for my mouth to curse. I turned and ran. I ran back through the stairwell where the woman lay with her head at a wrong angle that made my neck itch. I ran to my cabin, and my key card missed the slot the first time, and I almost screamed at the door like it had done a thing personally. It beeped green, and I fell inside. I sat with my back to the door and cried without tears. I made the small noises of someone trying not to make big noises. I made my hands into a cradle and put my face in it, and I told myself the same lie you tell yourself on planes when there's turbulence, that the people who make these things know what they're doing, that the men in the front are very calm right now, and that the lights always flicker like that. The ship swayed, and I let my head go with it. A stupid thought landed and made a nest. It must be nice to have a balcony, to sit outside and smoke and not make your room smell like panic. I don't smoke. It didn't matter. I stared at the wall like it would give me something, a hatch or a handle, some way to climb into a better part of the day. It can't have been hours. Not really. But time does that thing where it puts its hands over your eyes and you have to guess how many fingers it's holding up. My breathing stopped feeling like a betrayal. The engine hum kept its promise to be a constant. I thought, stupidly, of my mother's washing machine back home because it thumped like that on spin. I stood up like an old man and wiped the face I didn't remember wetting. I opened the door because not opening it would start a new life I didn't want to live. The passageway outside looked like a rendering. They aim for luxury, but the base layer is always hospital. The light was even and too clean. The handrail down the wall had a smear of rust red at elbow height. A palm print dragged into 5 untidy streaks that dried into the texture. I looked away the way you look away from someone who trips in public. I told myself, look for a crew member. They always know. Follow the uniforms. They move like fish, and you move like a piece of decorative plant. Let them swim. I made it up one deck because the staircases were something to do with your hands. The door from a stairwell to the lifeboat deck had a porthole. The glass looked thicker than necessary. The way cruise ships always look like they're overdoing it, because you're not supposed to think about how thin the skin is between you and the ocean. There were words on the glass. Thick strokes. Brown-black the way blood looks when it's decided to be a solid now. Don't look down. The letters were done with a rhythmic hand, the sort of handwriting that would normally calm you down, confident, neat, but the medium mattered and the medium screamed. I didn't know if I wanted to laugh because sure, okay, message received, or scream the face of whoever had scrawled it for choosing the most obviously unhelpful phrase in the world. Someone cleared their throat behind me. It was not a polite little cough. It was the clear "this is how I am a person" sound. I turned with my whole body because I didn't want to do it with just my head and see a face too late. There was a woman about my age, maybe a few years younger, hair pulled back in that cruise ponytail that says, "I gave up on humidity." She stared at my eyes with more focus than you'd give a stranger. I did the same to her because we were both learning the same language at the same time. "Did you look?" she said. She didn't whisper, but her voice had that dry, "We're in a library" carefulness. "No," I said. "No." We both waited for the other to start crying. We didn't. We made the smallest nods together, and it felt like the first brick of something we could stand on. "What's going on?" I said, which was a stupid question, but it's the only one anyone ever starts with. "Something's wrong," she said, and her mouth did a little hunting motion for the rest of the words. "People are." She made a motion with her hand like pouring. "They look out the windows, they look over the rail, and then they start crying like somebody told them the worst thing you can tell someone. But it's not for themselves, you know? It's like they feel sorry for somebody, and it hits them like a truck, and then they..." She looked at the door and the dried words. He didn't even try to stop me. He just smiled like he didn't want to scare me. He used my name, and I haven't told you my name yet. "It's Sarah." "Okay," I said, because that is a word that has nothing to do with consent and everything to do with "I hear you." My name doesn't help us right now, but I hear you." "You heard them," she said, and I realized she meant the noise outside the dining room, the change in air, the small twist in the buffet, line you explain away. "Cooling room," I said. "Deck 3. "What?" "I heard 2 crew," I said, and my voice sounded like someone else's. They said they took them to the cooling room. I don't even want to picture that. I don't know how many is them. What kind of ship needs a rule like "don't look down"? She said, looking at the glass again. "I mean, that's... everything on this ship is a rule," I said, which was supposed to be a joke, and came out as a note. They've got a laminated protocol for replacing napkins. No signal. That's how she put it, like 2 words were a cliff. No, signal. We both pulled our phones because it's reflex and because your hand needs a task. No bars. Wi-Fi network gone like it had never existed, like the ship had always been a closed system and they just let you pretend it wasn't by letting you scroll. I made a face and set my phone to airplane mode because that's a tick I have. It made me feel like I'd made a choice. A man in a white jacket turned into the corridor ahead of us like he'd put on invisibility and then realized it didn't work. He was older than me by a decade, maybe, clean-shaven, haircut to please a safety inspector. He looked directly at us and didn't do the thing everyone else was doing, which was to refuse to acknowledge her existence. He hissed. Not mean, not cartoonish, but the way someone hisses when they need you to know they're close to something that hears. "Come on," he said, and we went to him because his body had that clipped efficiency that made my shoulders drop 2 inches. "What's happening?" I said. "Not here," he said, and we took 5 fast steps, so we were between 2 fire doors. "They looked," he said. "The officers on the bridge. They all." He made a horizontal gesture with his hand across his face, not at the throat, but the eyes like he was wiping sweat. "It's not like anything I've ever seen. They looked. You can hear it when they do. The radio went dead except for I don't know what I heard." He took 1 short breath, and I saw a tremor in his jaw. "I'm going to try a lifeboat. Blindfold. It's stupid, but I don't have a better stupid." "I'm with you," Sarah said. "I'm not staying in this hotel." "We should wait for Coast Guard," I said, because the mood in me had backpedaled to the part of myself that likes rules and the correct people showing up with the correct equipment. "They can't even get to us if they don't know where to go, if the AIS is dead, if the radio's dead," he said. "If it's not dead, it's worse than dead." "I'm Jim," he said, as if it could matter later. You too keep your eyes ahead. If you feel it starting, if you feel that pity like it's your own, close your eyes and let me drag you. Don't argue, don't open them because it feels polite." We agreed. Of course we agreed. We were already moving with him like he'd invented gravity. We reached the door to the lifeboat deck, and the message on the glass looked like something someone wrote to themselves. I felt like it was written for the version of me that would ignore it to prove something. I was a little in love with that version of me. I tied the stripped sleeve of my shirt around my head like a child playing bandit. It stank like my sweat amplified by fear. The fabric wasn't wide enough, so I doubled it, and everything went black in a way that made the world feel small enough to hold. The cold outside hit like a real thing, like a person carrying a bucket. It washed over me, and I breathed the salt because the air in the ship had none. My hands went out like I was expecting to touch the wall of a cave. We move the way you move when the room is dark and the furniture is new. The deck under my shoes felt both solid and treacherous. The air had texture. I heard the sea loudly, but not the way you hear from a beach. This was close to the action. Big water hitting bigger metal, the reverb like it had opinions about you personally. There were other noises layered in. A drip that had chosen a rhythm, a high whine that could be wind or a wire wanting to be loose, footfalls that were not ours and did not care. 7 meters, he said, and you'd be a fool to trust the way you measure meters with your body in a ship you can't see. We shuffled. My shoulder brushed cold paint. The metal touched me back the way metal does. Honest. The lifeboat crane was a noise, and then it was a trembling through the deck, and then it was the feeling of a mass moving over your head that your animal brain never gets used to. He pulled a lever, and the boat began to slide down its rails, the sound of engineered friction. We were going to get in. It was going to be okay, in the way where okay is you in the ocean in a glorified orange bucket. Then the arm of the crane, the part meant to stay out of the way because someone designed it to, found a part of me that had misjudged by 2 inches, and the metal whacked my head above my right ear with a sound that lived in my teeth. The blindfold slipped up into my hair. The cold air hit one eye. My knees gave up. Something happened to balance, which is always in the back of your head and becomes the whole world when it fails. I made a sound. I heard no, no from someone, probably Sarah. I opened my eye because it was open and because closing it felt too slow. The waves were beautiful in that transactional way beauty gets when you're about to die. The moon laid a path down in light like it wanted us to follow the old trick. For a moment, I saw nothing but water. Then the motion under the surface figured itself out. There were bodies moving just under, slipping along the hull with the ship's motion. Not fighting it, using it. They were human in shape the way a mannequin is human. Too smooth, too literal. Arms and legs moved with intention, but without hurry, and the way the darkness stroked over them made them look like they'd been under too long. One of them turned, and I had time to think, oh, it sees me, and then it reached a hand toward the hull and climbed with a grip that made no engineering sense. The metal offers nothing to grab, but it didn't matter. Its fingers slid into something I couldn't see, and it lifted itself like the world was soft. When it came into the light, it was almost tender, the way something is tender when you're not ready to call it monstrous. The mouth had that wide shape babies have when they smile, because a face is close to their face. It was so stupidly friendly. Poor thing, a part of me thought, and the thought didn't come from the front of my brain where thoughts debate each other. It came from the old part, the deep part behind a door no one opens, and it didn't have a voice like mine. It had my voice to borrow, and it said, poor thing. It's cold. It's hungry. It's been hungry for so long. I cried. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even loud. My face just let go. The channels opened, and that was that. I cried like I was watching the end of a movie where someone who deserved love finally got it. The flood flooded. My breath found a rhythm and matched it to the sea. I wanted, with a desire that put a warm brand in my chest, to feed it. I wanted to put food into its smooth, friendly, too wide mouth. The hunger I felt wasn't hunger in my stomach. It was a hunger in my generosity. I wanted to give it things I didn't own. It climbed. It got its head over the rail and looked at me the way a child looks at a parent when they've made something with glue and macaroni and need you to praise them with your whole heart. Its smile made my teeth hurt. I moved to the railing because that's where this story goes. The ship swayed and helped me aim. The rail, you know how they're all rounded right up top, was cold and smooth, and it shocked me a little. The edge of the lower bar was sharper. It had a purpose. I had a purpose too. I lowered my head to meet the edge. The idea wasn't even an idea. It was a picture placed in my mind. Let me help you. Let me crack open an offer. It made perfect sense in the boneless way some dreams make sense. I was full of joy, not the jump on a bed kind, the serious kind, like a vow. There was a hand on my shirt. It scratched at my back and didn't get a grip, and then it got one, and it yanked. It didn't feel like help. It felt like correction. The lifeboat we hadn't yet finished lowering banged my ankle, and I didn't notice. I was busy being taken away from the best feeling I'd ever had. That hurt. I mean, inside hurt. The hand swore, and the word anchored me to the ship for the second it took to be fully pulled. I fell backward into the boat, and the world tilted wrong, and then did that thing where it decides down is a suggestion. Sarah landed half on me, half not. Her breath was hot against my neck. She clutched my shirt like I was a cliff. She tied the blindfold back down hard enough that it hurt. Jim swore at the lever, and the cable shrieked in answer. The boat descended. My tears kept coming, but the feeling behind them wavered. The boat touched water like it remembered how. It bounced once, and the bounce shook something loose. The crying stopped like a faucet you can turn. Not a trickle, just off. It left me empty in the way of aftershock, the way your muscles tremble 10 minutes after you're safe. I could breathe again without lying to myself. I heard it then, the change in the thing outside us. Something leaned over the railing above and opened a mouth big enough to take a forearm and up to the elbow and then the rest. The teeth were not a neat row. They were field. The anger came off like heat, not the real kind, but the kind of heat you feel on your back when someone hates you. It didn't look friendly now. That part had been for me. It hissed. The hiss wasn't wind. Push off, Jim said. and you could hear the way he was keeping his voice from going up in pitch, keeping it in the register of "Sir, right this way." He shoved the boat with his shoulder like the ocean was something you could argue with physically. We drifted 3 meters and then 6. The ship loomed and receded like a building that had decided it was a sky. The water wasn't flat. I had forgotten how much the ocean likes to remind you it is three-dimensional. We didn't say anything for a while, which is impressive if you think about it, because we were 3 people who had just done something unlikely under conditions we didn't deserve. The boat had an outboard. Jim coaxed it awake and it buzzed like an angry lawn. That sound was the best sound I will ever hear. It meant direction. I took off the blindfold because I figured we'd earned it, and because the moonlight had never looked like a lie before, and it didn't tonight either. Sarah left hers on for a handful of seconds longer, and then she took it off like it was a memory of something she wasn't going to let happen again. Behind us, a handful of faces leaned over the lower promenade like party guests at a balcony who had decided the party was below. Some were wrong in the mouth. Some looked normal in the way birds look normal until they look directly at you. One of them took a breath like it might name me, and I will live the rest of however long I get waiting for that name to land in my ear one night when I am making tea and the kettle screams. We pointed the little boat at the black smear of coast. It wasn't far. That was the great truth hiding under what happened. If you'd squinted from the pier, you could have said we were still in port. The ship hadn't left yet. Why hadn't they lowered the rest of the lifeboats? Because the crew on the bridge had looked and then smiled and then believed their skulls were bowls to be poured into. Because the crew not on the bridge had rules for fire and flood and food poisoning and none for the sudden failure of a face. I was shivering. I couldn't stop. It wasn't dramatic. It was a hand with a tremor. It was my jaw not lining up with my teeth. Sarah put a hand on my knee, and it did that thing where human touch resets the metronome. I looked at her and saw a streak of someone else's blood on her cheek and didn't say anything because what do you say to that? She took a breath and asked me if I was going to be okay in that way, where you put the answer into a box that can be carried. Yeah, I said. Yeah. We rode the little engine noise toward land, and I turned around because I am an idiot who needs to see. The ship looked like a toy made angry. It was too lit. It glowed in spots and was dark in others. It had the wrong number of lights on the bridge. There was a heat to it that was not thermal. It sat stilling the water and sending it away in long lines. I saw movement high up. I saw a cluster of people, or not people near the aft where the pool hung over the stern. Someone jumped or fell or was pushed. They hit the water and it welcomed them like it had invited them. They did not slap. They slid. For a second, I thought the word mercy, and then I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper and decided there were words I wasn't going to use anymore. Do you hear it? Sarah said. What? I said, and then I did. The ship was making a noise not on its schedule. It was a long, low sound like feedback through a mouth. It wasn't designed. It wasn't the horn. It was like someone was pressing the whole ship to their ear and humming. I put my hands on the sides of the boat because something in me wanted to go low. Jim muttered something in a language I didn't know. The sound of the engine got louder because he told it to. The coast got bigger. My teeth stopped touching reflexively. I realized at some point I'd left my book in the stairwell next to a red smear that used to be a person. It was a tiny detail with hands bigger than itself. We didn't talk about why we weren't going to look down. We didn't talk about how good it had felt to want to feed it. That's the thing I'll sit with until I can't sit anymore. I have never wanted to give someone something that belonged to me the way I wanted to give that to it. I have felt generosity and charity and love in ways that helped. This was other. It made a cathedral out of a rail. It put me inside a prayer that didn't care if I knew the words. The boat cut water. Spray came up and slapped me with hands that were not human. It stung and woke me up. The air smelled like the underside of a pier and copper and the clean plastic of a life vest. My shoes were wet because of course they were. The horizon was a plain dark and it did not care. The shore did not call to us like a movie. It just permitted us. After a while, time being what it was, I will not pretend to measure it. We heard a helicopter, and we shoved our fear down because we couldn't afford to feed it. The helicopter sound was a lie. It was the engine of a motorcycle along the waterfront, and I hated the stranger on that bike for a full 10 seconds for not being a better sound. The pier slid toward us, and I let Jim and Sarah make the decisions about what to tie. They threw lines. Hands appeared like magic and pulled us in because people who stand on docks have always had those hands. I climbed up like my bones were older than me. The man who grabbed my wrist smelled like a day of work. He looked at my face and did a fast little survey. His eyes landed on my eyes the way everyone's were landing on eyes tonight, and his shoulders went down when he saw I wasn't crying. "What happened out there?" he said. Not demand, not even question. He opened a space for words. "Something we don't have a form for," I said, which is not helpful, but it was the truth. "The bridge, no one." The words crowded. "Something in the water and on the air. If you look where the ship is touching the sea. If you look down, I made a gesture. I couldn't help it. Across my face, the wiping motion the crewman had made by accident. "You'll feel sorry," I said, and it sounded like the dumbest thing anyone had ever said. I wanted to slap myself, and also I wanted to weep. "Okay," he said in the same tone I'd used earlier to mean nothing except "I hear you." He looked past me at the ship, and his eyes did something I will have nightmares about, because it looked like he felt it grip him from here. He looked down at the water for half a second, and then he looked away hard like the sun had surprised him. "Don't look," I said. "Don't look down." He nodded and said it to the man behind him, and that man said it to the woman behind him. And it went down the line, not like an order, but like a prayer. We sat on the pier with our backs to a warehouse painted with words about citrus. Someone put a blanket around my shoulders because they had been waiting their whole life to put that blanket around someone. Nobody asked us to sign anything yet. The firefighters who arrived didn't swagger. They moved with the uncertain carefulness of people who had trained for everything else. The Coast Guard came. They had hats and radios, and they spoke in a code they had invented to be useful. I watched one of them pause near the edge and force himself to look at the ship instead of the water, like the words on the glass had followed him here. I saw men with binoculars, and I wanted to smack them. I saw a woman make eye contact with me and give me the smallest nod that meant, "I will not look down because I believe you." "Hey," Sarah said, and she put something into my hand. A sticky note, the kind you stick to a fridge to remind yourself you're not the kind of person who can remember olive oil on their own. It had been folded, opened, folded so many times the adhesive had transferred to the wrong places. There were 3 rules written in a hand that had been careful at the start and got more hurried line by line. It looked like a person had been trying to write while the ship was moving too much. At the top of the note, there was a printed letterhead. Not fancy, just the ship's logo and the words "Incident Procedure, Temporary." I'll get to that, but first you should know where I found it. It was taped in the crew-only corridor we'd cut across to get to the lifeboat, right next to a phone mounted on the wall that had a laminated card with extension codes. It was half peeled because no tape on a ship can commit. I grabbed it because it looked like information and because everyone else's hands were full of other people. On the paper, someone had written, "Rule 1. If you hear crying and you don't know why, do not offer comfort. Do not touch. Move away without speaking. Rule 2. Do not stand at windows after 1600. Blinds down. Shades closed. This includes portholes. Rule 3. If you go outside, keep your eyes on the horizon. Never look down at the hull or directly below the waterline. Rule 4. Safety if someone is crying, escort them to their cabin so they can rest. Hydration and rest will help. Rule 5. If you're unsure if you heard something, you heard it. Leave your post and report to the interior muster station by Service Elevator B. I didn't get the chill you're supposed to get in stories when you read rules. I got mad because Rule 4 was apologizing for Rule 1, because someone had tried to comfort someone and had their hands filled with blood, because safety had been written in parentheses like someone had argued about it and lost. I folded the note and put it into my pocket because I needed to keep one true thing. Later, The note mattered. The rules sounded arbitrary in the good way stupid rules sound when you've never needed them. Then they became the only logic that made sense. The night stretched. They gave us water in bottles that had been sitting in a crate long enough to taste like glue. I drank it like it could rinse something out of me. People around made calls that didn't go through and looked at each other like at least now our phones were useless together. Sirens came and stopped. A woman in a vest asked us if we had family on the ship, and I said yes, and then I had to explain I meant we, as in the species. She tried to smile and then didn't. I gave her the note because it was hers and also because it burned in my pocket. She read it, and her eyes did that thing again where something too big moved behind them. "What is this?" she said. "It's a template you fill in when the world goes wrong," I said. And if that sounds dramatic, I'm sorry, but my body was still shaking, and sometimes I get mean when I'm scared. "Do you think," she started and stopped, "do you think the ones in the water were from the ship?" "No," Sarah said before I could be polite. "No, they knew how to climb. People don't know how to do that." The woman swallowed the way you swallow after a bad drink. "We've got helicopters up," she said. "We're going to." She stopped. She looked at the bay. "We'll do what we can." What we can. There's a phrase that has never saved a life by itself, but shows up to watch. They didn't go out to the ship right away. Some decision was made above my head. Someone had read a rule out loud into a room, and the room had decided to be careful. They put spotlights on the ship and kept them on the superstructure, not the water. I thought of the couple by the window, their eyes overflowing without a change in the background expression. I thought of the woman on the stair and the soft smile. I thought of the bent steel rod and the way the guy had lifted it like he was trying to help someone reach something on a high shelf. I kept almost telling myself a story that would have made this all feel gentle. I kept almost calling it mercy. And then I would see the woman's head hit the stair again in my mind, and mercy would be a word covered in teeth. At some point, a man in a suit with a lanyard tried to speak to journalists, standing at a respectful distance. His voice made shapes, and those shapes sounded like incident and containment and cooperation. A reporter asked, "Is it true?" And he said, "We can't confirm." And I stopped listening because they were laying tracks ahead of a train that had already passed them, and it was just noise to my body that had climbed into a small boat to stop wanting to die. "You should sleep," Sarah said. There was a bench. We found a corner under a lamp that went off and then on and then off again. When it was off, the noise of the sea came through clearer. Not the ship, the sea. You can't get away from it in a port town. It's a person in every conversation. "I can't," I said, but that wasn't true. My eyes closed like the end of a decision I didn't make. I leaned on her shoulder because I guess we were those people now. She didn't mind. She leaned back because sometimes you have to be a bridge for a second. When I dream, it's normally jump cut and nonsense. That night, it was film reel, every detail art directed. I was back in the dining room hearing kids laugh and forks ping, and I was watching the couple stand up, napkins flung on plates like surrendered flags. I followed them this time. I knew what they were going to do, and I couldn't stop walking after them. They went to the promenade, to the big windows with the rounded corners. The glass was not perfectly clean because nothing big is perfectly anything. There was a smear at the bottom of one pane like a hand had learned a lesson and left it behind. The couple stood and looked out, and they smiled like I have never seen two people smile ever. That smile said, "We have been waiting for this our whole lives." They held hands the way you hold hands to cross a street in a city that doesn't love you. Their tears made small lines on the glass when they pressed their faces close. I wanted to scream. They put their foreheads against the glass, and then their mouths, because that's what you do when you want to share breath. And then their hands made fists, and their hands went to their faces, and there they were with their heads leaning back and their hands lifting things out of themselves like pearls. I woke with my throat, making a sound that woke other people. Sarah's hand was on my shoulder, shaking gentle. She didn't ask. We didn't talk. We sat up and we watched the light make a liar out of night. The sun came up like it always does, and I hated it a little for that. By noon, the headlines online, because the Wi-Fi back here worked fine, because of course it did, started to have words like mystery and tragedy and unfathomable, which was the first honest word they used. The ship stayed where it was, a rich kid given a corner to stand in. Rescue boats nudged up and did not get too near. A helicopter hovered, and the pilot kept it high, and the hoist stayed coiled. They repelled themselves from the surface because they could feel the rules even if they hadn't read them on a sticky note. I watched a diver in a dry suit sit on the edge of his boat and then shake his head and put his gear back in a bin. I watched him rub his palm over his eye and stare hard at something a little to the left of the day. We gave statements. It didn't feel like testifying. It felt like building a puzzle with wet hands. I told them about the stairwell and the crane and the way it had felt in my chest. I used the phrase, overwhelmed by compassion, because I had heard Sarah say it, and because it was the truth, and the woman taking notes wrote it down without looking at me, which I found comforting. It made it feel like we were on a line of a form that said, overwhelmed by compassion, Y/N. She drew a box next to it and filled it in. She put a check by Rule 4, safety, and then she struck through it with a pen, a neat line, not violent but definite. They asked me what the thing had looked like, and I lied a little. I said long drowned, and I said rows of teeth, and I said climbed a slick surface without friction, and I didn't say anything about the smile because I didn't want to put it into the air over us. I didn't want to hear it being tried out in someone else's mouth. I wanted to kill it by making it my secret, and then I felt the spike of shame because secrets keep things alive. We went home. That's too simple, but it's what happened. They put us in a van. It smelled like other people's fear and new upholstery. A woman sat up front with a clipboard and a tired ponytail, and she told us what would happen next in a voice that would make you do anything she asked. We crossed a bridge, and under it the water did that thing where it looks like fabric and also like teeth. And I picked a point on the horizon like Jim had said and did not drop my eyes. At a stoplight, a gull landed on a street light with weirdly graceful feet. It screamed because that is what gulls do. I flinched, then I laughed in a way that made me sound drunk. The rules, I said, and I handed the note back to Sarah without looking at it. Burn that. I don't know. Frame it. I don't want it. Keep it safe. Throw it away where the trash goes and not the ocean. She folded it carefully along the old creases. I'm going to keep it, she said, as a reminder of what not to trust. Rule 4 will get fixed when this goes back up on a wall. If they fix it, if there's a wall, you're going to tell people? I said, I'm going to tell people who know enough to count, she said. People who can write a better note. For weeks after, I couldn't look down in the shower. I washed by memory. I counted steps on stairs, and I never let my eyes go to the space where my feet were. I slept with the light on not because it made me feel safe, but because darkness made me go inward. I didn't want to be where that feeling lived. I wrote a list on my own refrigerator not because I needed it, but because I wanted to prove to myself that rules could be kind. It said water, bread, call mom, and I laughed because I had never been someone who wrote call mom. Because I had always called before it occurred to me a list would help. I didn't go back to the water. The city doesn't let you leave it entirely. There are fountains in every square, and people sell you oysters from trucks. I crossed streets to avoid puddles. I took 6 months to go near a pier. When I did, I kept my focus on the building across the way like it was a person I owed money to. I wanted to peek down between the slats and see the wet dark with its secrets. I didn't. I am proud of that. I think about the couple at the window, and I wonder what their last thoughts were, which is a terrible habit. The sentimental part of me wants to say they thought of each other, and maybe they did. But I think they thought about feeding someone. I think they thought about being useful. I think every impulse we've ever been proud of, the ones that make us bring casseroles and donate blood, was made into a rope and wound around their throats so gently they leaned into it with gratitude. Sometimes at night, I hear the sound a ship made when something put its mouth to it, and I sit up in the half-dark and I put my hand to the wall like maybe I'll feel a vibration through plaster that isn't there. I think about the note and the way Rule 4 bent to be friendly, deceptively safe. Some part of me liked it. I would have written that one too before I knew anything. If someone is crying, you go to them. That's a thing we taught ourselves to believe. And I think whatever was under us knew that. I think it knew our rules and it wrote its own. Here's where I put the plant back in the dirt, because you'll ask. Weeks later, a package showed up with no return address. The kind of brown padded envelope your aunt uses for Christmas presents when she's given up on bows. Inside was the sticky note, the same creases, but a different hand had written under Rule 4 in a steady block print. Do not. And below that, like a ticket number, a date and time. The night of the incident, their chosen word, their disappointing little label. We were listed like proof of concept. On the back of the note, small at the bottom, someone had written, "They beg with the face, not the voice." I didn't show it to the news. I didn't make a blog. I don't have the stomach for being a subject line. I sat at my table, and I put the note down, and I looked at it the way I had looked at the ocean with not looking down in mind. I stayed on the horizon of the paper. I didn't set it on fire because I am not dramatic in the ways I want to be. I put it in the freezer because a deep, dumb part of me believed the cold would slow it down. Sometimes I think about Jim and the way he held the lever like he'd been waiting his whole life for one lever that would be the lever. Sometimes I call the cruise line's recorded message just to hear the part where a cheerful voice tells you about safety drills, and I wait for the moment the menu breaks because it always does, and there's a hiss, and then nothing, and then please hold. I leave the line open like a dare. Nothing ever happens, but sometimes my face gets hot and I have to put the phone down like it bit me. If you're waiting for a moral, don't. If you want a pattern, find someone's grandmother and ask her to knit you one. There's a story we tell about the sea. It takes and it gives. That's not helpful. This wasn't the sea being hungry in the old way. This wasn't storm and sink. This was something using our good parts against us. I think we're easier to split open from the front. I stepped off the tour bus and smelled the sea, and I thought, the wind is nice, and I took pictures of cats. Later, I watched a woman make a terrible kindness to herself because something borrowed her pity. I don't know what climbed the hall. I know what climbed me. Don't look down. Don't offer comfort you didn't choose. If you feel the radiating heat of someone else's sorrow and it sits low in your gut and feels like yours, put your head up and find the line where water meets sky and keep it like a coin on your tongue you won't swallow. If you're offered the chance to feed someone who looks like you except for the smile, remember Rule 4 and remember the word "no" written in a hand that didn't shake. We pointed the little boat at the coast, and the ship slipped back into the line where the world ends. We rode a buzz that cut through the water the way a needle pulls thread. The creature, the hunger, leaned over the rail and opened a mouth full of answers I never want to know, and then it was smaller, because distance is still a blessing even if you don't believe in blessings. We made land the way animals do when they've been in the wrong place too long. We tied up and were lifted 3 bodies that had decided to keep being bodies. And the smile, that soft, careful, kind smile, that one stays with me like a warm hand on the back of my neck in a crowded room, guiding me nowhere at all. I wake with it behind my eyes, and I turn on the lamp, and I look at the corner of the room where the paint flecks, and I do not look down. I think of the rules taped to a wall we ran past, and how they tried to train us in 6 lines to be a new kind of animal. I think of the deceptive safety of a hand on a shoulder, and how we have to leave people alone, sometimes to keep them alive. I think of the engine's hum under the floor, and how it made a backbone for me when mine gave out. We sailed toward the coast while the ship lingered, while the faces at the rail smiled too wide for mouths, while something hungry counted. The moon made a path we didn't take. The water breathed. We didn't. Not until the rubber hit wood and the rope bit the cleat and the world remembered it had edges. I'm telling you this in the loudest voice I can manage without waking anyone. Keep your eyes up. If they cry and they smile at the same time, do not touch them. And if you love the sea the way you tell your friends you do when you're drunk on a beach, love it from far away and let the horizon be the only thing that has you.